Hi, tech fans! When Apple announced the Mac Studio, they made a lot of incredible claims. The CPU performance should be 60% higher than on the Mac Pro with 28 cores, and the graphic performance should be the same as on the RTX 3090 while consuming 200 watts less power. And yet, it is super small, barely thicker than a Mac Mini. Well, I tested the Mac Studio with the M1 Ultra to the absolute limits. The Mac Studio is a taller Mac Mini. It's made from a solid block of aluminum and has a very stripped down design. I hardly can say anything about it because there's not much to look at. I can understand anyone who finds this even a bit boring. There's the Apple logo on the top and small holes around the bottom for ventilation. The Mac Studio is surprisingly heavy at 3.6 kilograms. The 24-inch iMac weighs less than 900 grams more and there's a whole computer and monitor in it. Despite its compact form factor, the Mac Studio has a lot of ports. 4x Thunderbolt 4, one 10GB Ethernet, the power supply, two old classic USB-A, HDMI 2.0, so fortunately not 2.1, 4K with 120 FPS is therefore impossible, and an aux with high impedance. The person at Apple who hated SD card slots seems to be gone because that one has also made a comeback, even though it's only SDXC speed. Next to it there are two USB-C or Thunderbolt 4 ports depending on the processor. That's just awesome. Simply all the ports you could wish for. I just started this channel, it is super new, so a sub to it would mean the world to me. And next to the Mac Pro, it's also clear how small the Mac Studio is. Maybe 8 times smaller? That means I can put it into my backpack to bring it to clients or projects, which is just a nightmare with the Mac Pro. And next to even a relatively fancy Windows machine, it's just even more blatant because the Mac Studio looks so much more premium and modern. You really don't think that it can keep up with the others, but that's a bit naive. It all started with the Apple M1 processor. Apple showed that high performance and good battery life can go hand in hand, thanks to the efficient ARM architecture. The M1 Pro and M1 Max built on this concept and turned the new MacBook Pro into a super strong, thin notebook with still good battery life. And now there's the M1 Ultra. It is basically two M1 Max glued together over a super high bandwidth with 2.5 terabytes per second. That's virtually no latency. So two processors became one. One with 20 CPU cores consisting of 4 low power cores and 16 high performance cores. One with either 48 or 64 graphic cores. Up to 21 teraflops of performance, which is remarkable because the best graphic card on the Mac Pro, the AMD 6900X, which is $6,900, more than the entire Mac Studio, has only 1.2 teraflops more performance. Can you even believe that? And then there is the 64 or 128 gigabytes of unified memory, which is memory used by the CPU and GPU simultaneously. Meaning the processor, for example, is loading a 3D model but doesn't have to send it to the GPU to load it back to its memory. They have the same memory without latency, a memory with 800 gigabytes per second bandwidth. For comparison, the latest Intel processor has 94 gigabytes per second. Because of that, not everything has to be stored twice. The unified memory is more efficient and faster, and the GPU can theoretically pull up to 124 gigabytes, which is 100 gigabyte more than the RTX 3090. The SSDs range from 1 to 8 terabytes with blazing fast 8 gigabyte per second. It doesn't get any better than that right now. Loads of performance, as you can see, either the M1 Max or the M1 Ultra, which is twice as powerful. There is a neural engine for machine learning and 4 video editing acceleration units. Some people say technology is nothing special anymore, but I can't remember a point of time where so much happened at once. And now it's time to test out the performance. I have a Mac Pro with me, which costs 13,000 euros. I have a second Mac Pro here with a 28-core CPU and 2 Vega 2 graphic cards. Furthermore, a Windows Tower with the Intel 12900K and the RTX 3090, exactly the setup Apple used for its comparison at the keynote. Since Geekbench tests different aspects of a system and spits out a mixed score, here is it by the way, I decided to take a much more meaningful test for CPU and GPU in Blender. This 3D program can create maximum continuous load and is optimized for Apple Silicon and Intel, so evening the odds. The CPU of the M1 Max took 6 minutes and 33 seconds for one frame. The Mac Pro with 16 cores, 3 minutes and 40 seconds. The Mac Pro with 28 cores, 2 minutes and 27 seconds. The Intel 12900K took 3 minutes and 9 seconds and the M1 Ultra 3 minutes and 22 seconds. Apple claims the M1 Ultra is 60% more powerful in the CPU than the 28-core Intel. We all thought they meant multi-score, but now we obviously see they meant single score, which is super cheeky. In that case, even an iPad Air is 60% stronger than the Mac Pro. That doesn't mean much. In professional applications, it's always about the multi-core, and the 28-core wasn't 60% worse, it was 41% better. Still, very impressive from the M1 Ultra because it's 5% faster than the 16-core Mac Pro and only very close behind the latest Intel processor. Why wasn't that enough for Apple? Why did they have to present the numbers in such a way? But it even gets more exciting with the GPU. The M1 Max needed 2 minutes and 6 seconds for one frame. The Mac Pro with 2 V5700X 50 seconds. The Mac Pro with 2 Vega 2 strangely took 6 seconds longer, which can only be explained by the older tech, and the M1 Ultra needed 1 minute 19 seconds. But the real sensation is the RTX 3090. Apple spoke of a comparable performance, but it only needed 16 seconds. That's more than 4 times shorter. So CGI remains an application area for Windows. And why? Because Apple and Nvidia have a dispute. But what about video editing? I cut and rendered my iPad 5 review in Final Cut, including all the unused files, which means a total of 10 minutes, 5.9K ProRes RAW footage. The Mac Studio is faster than any iMac or MacBook Pro, but again, well behind the Mac Pro when it comes to exporting and noise reduction. Overall, editing performance was very fast and smooth. It was really fun to use. Apple says the M1 Ultra and only the M1 Ultra can play 18 streams of 8K ProRes video smoothly. I believe that because I saw it myself. The video accelerators of the M1 Ultra are a dream for Final Cut when we combine ProRes and H.264 and H.265 files. This even ended up much better than on a Mac Pro. The 128GB of unified memory was enough for me. Only when I opened Blender, Final Cut and Pixelmator I could hit a limit, then everything was full. Realistically, most people won't fill up the 64GB of unified memory only for stuff like music production, where you can load a lot of instruments into the RAM. And for a future Mac Pro, more RAM would be desirable, but come on. Even after hours of maximum CPU and GPU load, the Mac Studio remained silent. Cooling takes up most of the case, and that's a good thing. It sucks in the cold air at the bottom and blows it out on the back. You can feel it, but not hear it. Doing the same task, a 16-inch MacBook Pro with M1 Max was at its maximum fan speed. The Mac Studio gets warm, but the performance was not throttled. Furthermore, the M1 Ultra consumed way less power than the Mac Pro. But the Mac Pro is completely modular, and you can't upgrade a single thing on the Mac Studio. It doesn't even have a screw, you can't even open it. All you can do is connect an external hard drive to it. That means you have to go to Apple for every repair. But it also means that there's a better, cheaper Apple Care. And the modularity of the Mac Pro has really aged badly. Everything is so overpriced. After all my testing, which Mac Studio do I recommend? For most people, the smallest version is perfect and it's the best deal. However, the people that would have gone with a Mac Pro in the past now should definitely think about the M1 Ultra, but only with 48 graphic cores, because the price jump to the 64 cores is just too high and the performance will be comparable. And I mean, the rest of the hardware is identical. For the unified memory, 64GB is enough, because you will only really rarely feel the advantages of 128GB. For the SSD, 2TB is recommended because the extra money you spend is fair, anything about that rather less. That brings up the total price to $4,400. A lot of money, but in the context, a bargain. Only $100 more expensive than a MacBook Pro 16-inch with the same memory, but the M1 Ultra is twice as fast. And $1,600 cheaper than the latest Mac Pro although the performance is more comparable to a $13,000 Mac Pro. I must say, that's really good price to performance ratio for Apple. Conclusion. When was the last time we've seen a completely new Mac? I mean, 5 years ago with the iMac Pro, but that was only a more powerful Mac Pro, and the Mac Studio is, well, it's a more powerful Mac Mini, but it's also super powerful and can be compared to a Mac Pro, which is quite impressive. But I don't think that Mac Pro users should upgrade to the Mac Studio because the Mac Pro is still more powerful, and there will be an Apple Silicon Mac Pro, which I only can imagine to be super strong and super pricey. All in all, the Mac Studio is an engineering marvel. It is extremely powerful, relatively cheap, and yet super small. That's it from me. I hope you liked it. See you in the next one. Bye.